"This is not personal, Myron," my manager Denise Kowalski said, standing in the doorway of her office while I stood in the hallway holding my cold morning coffee and a box of my belongings. A single mom juggling school pickups and sick days is not what this role requires anymore. 4 years of flawless dedication wiped out in 90 seconds, purely because I was raising my 6-year-old daughter Ellie on my own. She looked at me like I was completely powerless, entirely unaware that 6 days later, the CEO of the entire corporation would walk onto that same floor, look her dead in the eye, and introduce me as his biological sister. She thought she was quietly removing an inconvenient employee, but she had actually triggered an investigation that brought 30 years of hidden family truth crashing down on her head. Before I explain how a cold corporate dismissal turned into the ultimate quiet reckoning, tell me this. Have you ever been punished or written off simply for prioritizing your family when you gave a job your absolute all? Where are you watching this story from tonight? My name is Maren Sutton. I am 30 years old, and until that fate-filled Tuesday morning, I believed that if you just kept your head down, worked hard, and endured unfairness in silence, life would eventually balance itself out. I was a senior operations coordinator at Kessler Logistics, a woman who had built her entire life on never asking anyone for a rescue. But what happened next proved that quiet endurance is never weakness, and some truths are just waiting for the right moment to be spoken. To understand why I walked to my desk that Tuesday without shouting or causing a scene, you have to understand how I was raised. My mother, Colleen, raised me entirely alone in a small rental outside Scranton after my father left when I was just 2 years old. He vanished without a trace, leaving no phone number, no child support, and no explanation. My mother never remarried and never spoke his name. She carried the entire weight of our survival on her shoulders, working double shifts and showing me by example that a woman alone has to be twice as tough and half as loud as everyone else. When she passed away 4 years ago, she took my father's real identity to her grave, leaving me with a habit of quiet endurance that became my primary shield against the world. When my daughter Ellie was born 6 years ago, her father chose to walk away too, preferring to keep fatherhood as a purely hypothetical concept. From month 3, I was raising Ellie on a coordinator's salary in a city where childcare cost almost as much as my rent. I became the ultimate load-bearing wall, balancing full-time career demands, early school drop-offs, late-night fever checks, and strict budgets without complaining. I learned early that fighting for fairness often takes more energy than you have left for surviving, so I put my head down and made myself indispensable. I worked at Kessler Logistics for 4 years. For the first 3 years, I thrived under a manager who recognized hard work and measured performance by results rather than corporate optics. I managed freight schedules, coordinated interstate drivers, and fixed supply chain bottlenecks that saved the company tens of thousands of dollars each quarter. But 8 months ago, that manager retired, and Denise Kowalski took over our operations center. Denise was the kind of manager who valued visible presence over actual productivity. She was obsessed with control, keeping track of every bathroom break, every departure time, and every minute spent away from a desk. From her very first week, she looked at me not as a proven professional, but as a liability because of my marital status. She began applying subtle double standards that slowly eroded my position. When male colleagues took hour-long lunches or stepped out for golf afternoons, Denise called it networking. But when I arrived 7 minutes late because Ellie had spilled juice on her dress right before preschool, Denise would make loud, passive-aggressive remarks about reliability in front of the entire team. Over those 8 months, I worked late from home almost every single night after Ellie went to sleep. I answered emergency emails at midnight, patched operational glitches over weekends, and made sure my department never missed a single deadline. Yet, Denise kept meticulously documenting every minor disruption. In those 8 long months, I missed exactly 3 days of work. Once when Ellie had a sudden stomach flu, once for a mandatory parent-teacher conference scheduled a month in advance, and once for a dentist appointment I had already rescheduled twice because there was never a convenient time for the office. 3 days in 8 months, all fully backed by advance requests and official notes. Denise turned those 3 days into an entire narrative of incompetence. She used corporate buzzwords to mask personal bias, slowly building a case against me while quietly taking credit for the smooth logistics operations I was managing behind the scenes. I carried the department on my back, but to Denise, I was nothing more than an inconvenient single mother who did not fit her rigid corporate mold. When Denise called me to her office doorway that Tuesday morning, she did not even invite me to sit down. She held a manila folder against her chest like a shield and delivered her rehearsed speech with total flatness. "I have documentation," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Every absence was approved in advance. Denise did not dispute the paperwork. She simply stated that the team needed someone without complications, added that HR would send my severance paperwork by the end of the day, and turned her back on me. 4 years of dedicated service ended in 90 seconds standing in a hallway. I packed my desk in under 20 minutes. A chipped coffee mug, a cardigan I kept for the building aggressive air conditioning, and a framed photo of Ellie at her kindergarten graduation. I said goodbye to 2 coworkers who looked away in discomfort, terrified that saying something compassionate might put them on Denise's hit list next. I stepped into the elevator lobby, box balanced against my hip, feeling a familiar cold, quiet settlement in my chest. As the elevator doors opened, the entire 3rd floor seemed to shift its attention. Theodore Ridley, the CEO who had taken over Kessler Logistics from his adoptive father 6 years earlier and doubled its corporate revenue, stepped out surrounded by assistants and security. He was in his early 40s, moving with an unhurried confidence that made everyone around him look frantic. As he walked past me, he glanced at the cardboard box in my arms, stopped dead in his tracks, and stared directly into my eyes with intense focus. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silent lobby. "Do I know you from somewhere?" "No, Mr. Ridley," I replied, shifting the heavy box to my other hip. "I do not think so." He kept looking at me, something processing behind his eyes before speaking almost to himself. "You have my mother eyes," he said quietly, before catching himself with a brief look of embarrassment. "I apologize. That was strange of me. Have a good afternoon." I drove home, sat in my car in the driveway, and allowed myself to cry for exactly 10 minutes before wiping my face and going inside to Ellie. But what I did not know was that Theodore Ridley had been conducting a private, painstaking search for 4 months. 7 months earlier, while going through his late father's old filing cabinet, Theodore found an original marriage certificate for a man named Gerald Whitlock and a birth certificate for a daughter Gerald had abandoned 30 years prior. Gerald Whitlock had legally changed his name to Gerald Ridley to escape business debts, remarried, and raised Theodore as his only known child, keeping his past completely buried. 3 days after my termination, my phone rang. A warm, professional voice introduced herself as Camille Ortiz, an attorney representing Ridley Family Holdings on a private matter. She asked to meet me regarding my late mother, Colleen Sutton, and a man named Gerald Whitlock. Sitting at my kitchen table, I felt my breath hitch. I met Camille at a quiet cafe 2 days later while Ellie was at school. Camille laid out the entire paper trail. Gerald Whitlock was my biological father. Theodore was my half-brother. Theodore had hired private investigators to track me down through public records and corporate registries, which was how he discovered I worked at Kessler Logistics in the first place. He had no idea I had been terminated until his assistant flagged my name on a routine exit document that very week. "He did not fire you," Camille explained softly. "Your manager did, in direct violation of our company-protected caregiver policies. Theodore wants to meet you privately, as family, not as a corporate event." In the 6 days between my termination and the scheduled meeting with Theodore, the operations department at Kessler Logistics began to fall apart. Denise had assumed that removing me would be a seamless transition, expecting the rest of the team to easily absorb my workload. She severely underestimated just how much invisible labor I performed every single day. Freight schedules stalled. Key logistics accounts faced unexpected delays, and shipping coordinators scrambled to resolve software glitches that I used to handle quietly in minutes. Instead of taking responsibility for the mounting chaos, Denise doubled down on her narrative. She launched a subtle campaign of professional gaslighting across the department. She held morning stand-up meetings where she openly blamed the team operational delays on the backlog left behind by a former employee who lacked commitment. She framed my departure as a necessary cleaning of house, telling remaining staff that personal issues and family distractions had compromised my work quality for months. When 2 senior drivers asked why my emergency coverage protocols were no longer working, Denise brushed them off, claiming I had deliberately left incomplete files out of bitterness. She even attempted to alter the internal departmental logs, editing performance notes to make my 3 approved absences look like unexcused abandonments of duty. She was attempting to rewrite history, protecting her managerial image in case corporate auditing ever looked too closely at her turnover numbers. Meanwhile, sitting in my small living room, I experienced a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt the heavy temptation to retreat, to take whatever modest severance pay was offered and walk away quietly. just as my mother had spent her whole life doing. The prospect of stepping into the top-floor executive suite felt terrifying. I was a single mother fighting to keep my rent paid, while Theodore Ridley was the head of a massive logistics empire built on the foundation of a father who had erased my existence to build his own wealth. When I looked at Ellie playing on the rug with her colored pencils, drawing pictures of our tiny family, something inside me shifted. I realized that keeping quiet was no longer protecting anyone. It was merely giving people like Denise permission to step on others without consequence. If my father's abandonment had shaped my past, I was not going to let a dishonest manager shape my daughter's future. When Camille called to confirm the final arrangements for our meeting, I made a specific choice. Theodore had offered to handle the situation completely behind closed doors, without Denise ever knowing what had happened. But I knew that if Denise was left unchecked, she would continue treating other working parents with the same callous disregard. I told Camille that I agreed to meet Theodore, but I wanted one specific condition met. Denise Kowalski needed to be present in that room to face the truth of what she had actually done. On Monday morning, I walked through the main doors of Kessler Logistics operations building, but this time I did not need an employee badge. Security greeted me politely and escorted me directly to the executive elevator, where my name had been personally placed on the morning visitor list by the CEO himself. The contrast between my exit 6 days prior with a cardboard box and my arrival today was surreal, yet my focus remained entirely grounded. When I stepped into Theodore Ridley's office on the top floor, he stood up immediately. Without the crowded lobby, the security guards, or his entourage of assistants, he looked far less like an intimidating corporate executive and more like a man carrying a heavy emotional weight he had tried to process alone for months. Camille Ortiz sat quietly in a leather armchair nearby, holding a thick, leather-bound binder. "Thank you for coming, Marin," Theodore said, his voice quiet and completely lacking corporate bravado. "I know this past week has been absurdly strange on top of everything you have already been through." "You could say that," I replied plainly, and the dry honesty in my tone brought a brief, genuine smile to his face, breaking the tension between us. He invited me to sit and placed a manila folder on the desk between us. Inside were certified copies of our father's original marriage certificate to my mother, Colleen Sutton, my legal birth certificate, and official bank records showing the exact month Gerald Whitlock changed his identity to Gerald Ridley. Theodore explained how he had spent 7 months sifting through their father estate, terrified of reaching out prematurely and disrupting my life without absolute certainty. "I grew up believing my father was a self-made man who built an empire from scratch," Theodore admitted, looking me dead in the eye with deep sincerity. Learning that he erased a wife and a 2-year-old daughter to build my life was a devastating shock. I spent months searching for you, only to discover my own company had tossed you out the door 6 days ago. Camille stepped forward and opened her binder, presenting an internal audit report. She confirmed that Theodore had launched an immediate inquiry the moment my name appeared on the exit logs. The audit revealed that my termination was a direct breach of corporate caregiver protection policies that Theodore had personally authored 2 years prior. My performance metrics were pristine, and my 3 absences were completely authorized. Theodore turned to me with genuine remorse. "I called Denise Kowalski into this office 20 minutes before you arrived," he explained. "I wanted to hear her side first. I can handle her dismissal quietly, or she can come in right now and face us together. Which would you prefer?" I looked at my half-brother, feeling the last remnants of my mother's quiet, timid endurance transform into clear, unshakable courage. "Call her in," I said. Before I tell you exactly how Denise reacted when she stepped into that room, ask yourself this. If you were standing in my shoes, face to face with the person who tried to destroy your livelihood for being a single parent, would you have demanded her immediate firing, or would you have chosen a different path? Let me know in the comments below. Denise Kowalski stepped into the CEO office looking polished, composed, and confident. She clearly expected a routine executive briefing regarding department restructuring. But the moment her eyes landed on me sitting across from Theodore, her expression stiffened, her steps slowed, and her professional composure cracked. "Mr. Ridley," she began smoothly, quickly attempting to mask her surprise. "I did not realize you were in a private meeting. Is there something wrong with the handover files?" "Denise," Theodore said, his voice calm, level, and carrying a sharp authority that made the air in the room turn cold. "I want to introduce you properly to Marin Sutton." He paused for 3 long seconds, letting the silence fill the office. "My sister." Denise stood frozen, her eyes darting between Theodore and me as if trying to locate a hidden joke or a family resemblance she had completely missed. "I am sorry," she stuttered. "Your sister?" "My half-sister," Theodore corrected calmly. "I spent 7 months trying to find her, only to discover she was working inside my own company and was terminated 6 days ago for what your notes describe as reliability concerns related to single parenthood." Denise's face went pale. "Mr. Ridley, I was simply protecting department efficiency," she stammered, calculating her options in real time. "A single mother with unpredictable home demands—" "I have read her file, Denise," Theodore interrupted, cutting her off with absolute precision. 3 approved absences in 8 months. Pristine performance reviews for 4 years. I also reread our corporate caregiver policy, which I personally authored 2 years ago. What you did was not a business decision. It was a direct violation of corporate policy and an act of personal bias. He turned to me, his tone instantly softening. "Marin, I am offering you your senior position back immediately with full back pay for the time lost and a transfer to any department of your choice. But only if that is what you want." I looked at Denise, who was standing near the door, completely stripped of her corporate arrogance, facing the exact reckoning she thought she had avoided. I looked her dead in the eye and spoke with complete clarity. "I want my job back," I said, "under a manager who measures work by results, not by personal prejudice." Denise was dismissed from the office minutes later. Following a complete review of her department records by Camille team, Denise was formally reprimanded for policy violations. She was stripped of her managerial authority and transferred to a minor administrative role with 0 direct reports, a quiet professional consequence that ended her ability to ever mistreat another working parent. As for me, I accepted the reinstatement and transferred to the regional logistics division under Frank Delacroix, a veteran manager who valued efficiency, honesty, and family commitments above corporate politics. Theodore and I stayed in his office for over an hour after Denise left, talking not as a CEO and an employee, but as 2 siblings trying to bridge 30 years of separation. He told me about growing up as Gerald Whitlock's only child, always feeling an unspoken shadow over his father passed. I told him about my mother Colleen, and how her quiet, fiercely protective love had shielded me from a truth she believed would break my heart. We did not heal 3 decades of emotional distance in one afternoon, but we built a foundation of genuine trust. Today, Theodore and I have dinner every few weeks, often joined by my daughter Ellie. At 6 years old, Ellie has decided with total confidence that having an uncle who runs a giant logistics company is the single most exciting thing about our family. Theodore is exceptionally careful never to make our relationship about corporate influence. He treats me as a completely independent professional at work, and I respect him deeply for ensuring that my career stands entirely on my own merits. I think back to that Tuesday hallway sometimes, and to the 90 seconds it took Denise to dismiss my 4 years of hard work without ever bothering to learn who I really was. For a long time, I believed that the worst part of being underestimated was the unfairness of the judgment itself. But I have since learned that the reality is much simpler and far more common. People often mistake quiet endurance and patient composure for weakness right up until the moment the dynamic shifts and they realize they were never looking at the full picture at all. If anyone in your life has ever tried to measure your worth based on the parts of your story they were too impatient or too arrogant to understand, I hope you hold on to this truth. Being quiet does not mean you're fragile. Sometimes it just means you are quietly gathering the truth, waiting for the room that is finally ready to hear it.